This is one of my, yes, it has got a reference, one of my favourite databases, which we'll probably dip into every now and then. It's not, like everything so-called social sciences, it's imperfect. It's not like doing natural sciences or engineering or even coding. You know, there's a lot of noise and lots of assumptions you have to make, but it's a pretty good database. It's been going since the late 60s, so it's been going quite a long time. In any 1 year, because membership varies by year, you pay a big fee to enter it, and some companies back out after a year or go bankrupt, such like. There's about 3,000 companies in the database each and every year of that long period, across a whole range of sectors. Okay, so it's an interesting database because it's quite large and has a longitudinal data set, which many don't have. Yeah, most studies are cross-sectional surveys and things. So it has some robustness. Okay, okay, and they measure about 50, 60 variables, which we're not interested in today. We're interested in a couple of things they measure and one particular output. Okay, so a couple of things they've measured from very early on, five or 6 decades. They're the two axes. Yeah, what they call differentiation, what they call relative equality, and then we'll look at the outcomes, which are the ROI figures. The source is PIMS, Profit Impact and Market Strategy. Used to be part of General Electric, then it was spun out. I think it's acquired by McKinsey as management consultants. Then it was another consultancy, and yet it's another consultancy because it's been going all this time. Okay, so it's a commercial thing now, but it's spun out several places. Where should we start? Okay, ROI as return on investment at the product or service level. Okay, so it's not the company level because that's meaningless. Anyone who's done accounting will realise you can't get much management sense out of aggregated published data. Okay, you can't. There's too much happening, too many different accounting standards and assumptions. So this drills down to the product or service level. So we're not talking about company return on investment because it's a meaningless concept. Okay, so it's trying to understand, if you like, product and service success. And the two variables we're looking at here, 2 out of about 50, 60, are differentiation on the horizontal axis and relative equality. Okay, and what it's basically saying, like most of these management type things, is you can split the data up into different boxes or quadrants in this case, and you can say depending what quadrant you're in, you want to understand how strong the relationships are between the axis and the outcome. Okay, so you can graphically scatter your 3,000 points in that, and what you find is pretty consistently across time, the return on investment varies over periods because cost of capital does, but the relationship relatively is very stable. Okay, definitions. Horizontal axis. Differentiation other than by price. That's their definition, not mine. Okay, so that's the definition they use when they collect their data. So they're looking at ways of capturing differentiation. How different is the product or service to its direct competitors? Okay. And on the vertical axis, they've got a measure of relative perceived quality, again, which they have refined over many decades, relative to, what might it be relative to? Yeah, competing offerings. It might be a service, but yeah, real competing offerings. That sounds stupid, doesn't it? Probably, yeah. But it's not like a numerical thing where you say, you know, we could get 100% if we spend enough. It's saying, well, what else are we competing against? And it's relative to that. Okay? Because that's the important thing. Okay? And perceived by who or whom? Potential buyers, if you like. Not necessarily consumers, that implies they're current customers, but certainly target segment, yeah, to use that terminology. So it's not the whole market, because as you rightly say, there's lots of diversity in the market, particularly consumer markets, but the target segment. So you've got 2 measures that have been refined over many decades. Not perfect, but they're precise. Okay, and then basically splat your 3,000 data points across that, and you do that each and every year, and you get patterns emerge with some explanatory power. Okay, bottom left-hand quadrant is, if you like, the baseline. So if you have low differentiation and you have low relative quality, then in that particular slice of the data, your return on investment at the product or service level was 15%. What does that tell you? Nothing. That's what it tells you, absolutely nothing. Because you don't know what the cost of capital is. If your cost of capital is 20%, you're losing money very quickly. Doesn't mean you can't survive, because you're going to venture capital. It's another issue. Yeah? It might be about footfall or growth or scale. But it means that you're losing money one way or the other. Yeah, it might not be your money, but you're losing money. If your cost of capital is less than that, you're making some money. Okay, so it doesn't mean you can't have a business there. That's really important to understand. So I said in the introduction, you don't have to innovate to create value. There are other ways. Okay? But we're not going to cover those on this course because it's about managing innovation. Okay, so that quadrant's more about the other ways that you might do that. The other three quadrants, I would argue, are at least partially due to different types of innovation. So what it is saying is if you move along the horizontal axis, your return on investment at the product or service level, you add, well, not quite 10 percentile points, but you add 7, 8. Yeah, it's hard to do arithmetic when you're up here. And that's a big deal. Anyone who's been in a real business, you know, that's a huge difference in return. Okay, that's not trivial. Okay, often you're talking about fractions of percentiles year on year. Alternatively, you've got the vertical axis, which is a different strategy if you like, and you get a similar, slightly big. The noise is there. It's a very similar boost. Yeah. If you get them both right, not simultaneously, then you can double the base ROI, and that's a consistent finding across time, and that's really quite aspirational in the sense you can get both of those right. You know, across a very large data set across many, many years, you can, you know, roughly double your base return on investment. So there's, if you like, there's a holy grail, depending on religious disposition. There's something to aim for there. Okay, so my question to you is, firstly, what types of innovation might contribute towards moving along the horizontal axis? So what types of innovation might contribute towards increased differentiation? Any thoughts?
Tracing in kind of unique product, something that is not already out there.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, could be things we'll look at later, not today, but new product development, new service development, inherently new things. As we said earlier, trying to avoid direct competition because then it becomes price competition, and in the long term, in the short term, the consumer wins. The long term, nobody wins because nobody reinvests, doesn't innovate. Okay, so it's bad news. So yeah, it could be a whole new product. You can look at an existing sector or existing offering and say there's a big gap there. Some methods and tools in new product development are there to help you to identify those gaps. And we'll talk about those when we look at product and service development, okay? And that's certainly a legitimate way of going about that. Any other ways that you might move along the horizontal axis? It could be if the process innovation allows you to differentiate. And it does often in services, for example. So a lot of services you experience, you know, getting on a plane, not university so much, it's too close to comfort. Going to a restaurant, yeah, stuff like that. Experiential stuff. A lot of services, if you like, the difference between them in terms of that I like that experience more than that experience, yeah, is the backroom stuff, and often that's process innovation. So I qualify and say yes, if the process innovation contributes to that, and it certainly does in service offering, sometimes in product also. I mean, the early iPhones, one of the reasons they were so aesthetically pleasing, even before you turned them on, is because they had lots of patented processes in terms of how they made the clamshells and such like, or Foxconn did. Yeah, so there's something there in terms of process engineering. That hasn't been maintained, but that's another issue. So certainly process innovation can contribute. Okay. Other things might be design, which is different to product development necessarily. You can redesign an existing product to make it different or more pleasing, and that can have a benefit. So there's a whole range of things we're arguing that can help you move along the horizontal axis. What about the vertical axis? A different strategy. So saying, okay, we don't want to differentiate, or we can't. What we're going to do is try to increase our relative perceived quality. We're going to move up the vertical axis. What types of innovation might you manage to achieve that? Marketing, yeah, you could play around with the perceived bit. And don't underestimate that. You know, if you bombard people with a message, you know, after time, people tend to accept it. They don't challenge it. And that's a lot of that is behind brands and how you create identities and maintain. It can be very expensive and time consuming, but certainly that's one way to play around with the perception. And that could be very lucrative because it boosts margins, which is one reason why you get an extra 10% on return on investment. Yeah? It's people willing to pay a premium price because they perceive it to be a premium offering. So certainly one perhaps cynical way, but practical way of doing it. Yeah. Any other ways you might do it? Packaging, how you present it, certainly, how you put particularly how you put different things together. A lot of things we'll talk about on the module are not necessarily artifacts or products, and they're not pure services. They're often a combination thereof. And if you think of a lot of things, you know, whether it be Apple, Amazon, or whatever, they're beginning to blur the distinction. You know, some are coming from hardware into services, and some are coming from pure services into hardware. But to make those things work and create lots of value, they need to work well together. So certainly, packaging generally defined, the combination of those products and services is certainly an area where you can improve the relative perceived quality. So, for example, and don't throw things down at me because it's a bit like football teams and religion, but whatever you think about Apple products, and it tends to divide everybody, everyone has a view, but whatever you think about Apple products, they're more seamless, they're not entirely seamless in terms of the product, service, content offering than they are the competitors. Okay? Or we can argue the competitors have different benefits, and we may do that later in the module. But even if you're a sort of anti-Apple person, you have to acknowledge that one of the selling points, one of the ways to create value, is a more integrated offering. And there are downsides to that, which we'll discuss here. But certainly one of the plus sides is premium pricing, because it creates this sort of walled garden of product, services, and content that work relatively well together. Yeah. So packaging generally defined. So what we're saying is innovation can have quite subtle and combinational effects on moving around that particular value space. Okay. Okay. And if you get lots of those things right, you can move towards that top right-hand quadrant, which will be very nice indeed. Okay. Same database, different slice of data.